I am Lady Rain, and this is the Reader's Nook, and we are in Part 3, Chapter 1, and nope, don't even care about my hair this morning. Part 2. The Avis clerk told Annie he had no cars to rent. Annie was going toward Haven, I guess, but right now she's in Bangor. That if Annie hadn't made a reservation in advance, she was out of luck, so sorry. It was summer in Maine, and the rental cars were at a premium. There was a mistake on the part of the clerk, a bad one. Annie smiled grimly, mentally spat on her hands, and went to work. Situations like this were meat and drink to Sister Anne. She had nursed her father until he had died a miserable death on the 1st of August, 8 days ago. She had refused to have him removed to an IC facility, preferably instead to wash him, medicate his bed sores, change his incontinence pads, and give him his pills in the middle of the night by herself. Of course, she had driven him to the final stroke, worrying him constantly about selling the house in Layton Street. He didn't want to. She was determined that he would. Final monster stroke, which occurred after 3 small ones at 2-year intervals, came 3 days after the house was put up for sale. But she would no more admit that she knew this than she would admit the fact that although she had attended St. Bart's in Utica ever since earliest childhood, and was one of the leading laywomen in that fine church, she believed the concept of God was a crock of shit. By the time Anne was 18, she had bent her mother to her will, and now she had destroyed her father and watched dirt shoveled over his coffin. No slip of an Avis clerk could stand against Sissy. It took her about 10 minutes to break the clerk down, but she brushed aside the offer of a compact car which Avis held in reserve for the very occasional, celebrity passing through Bangor, and pressed on, scenting the young clerk's increased fear of her as clearly as a hungry carnivore scents blood. 20 minutes after the offer of the compact, Annie drove serenely away from Bangor International behind the wheel of a Cutlass Supreme, reserved for a businessman scheduled to deplane at 6:15 p.m. By that time, the clerk would be off duty, and besides, she had been so unnerved by Anne's steady flailing that she wouldn't have cared if the cutlass had been earmarked for the President of the United States. She went trembling into the inner office, shut the door, locked it, put a chair under the knob, and smoked a joint one of the mechanics had laid on her. Then she burst into tears. Anne Anderson had a similar effect on many people. 3. By the time the clerk had been eaten, it was going on 3 o'clock. Anne could have driven straight to Haven. A map she'd picked up at the Avis counter put the mileage at less than 50. But she wanted to be absolutely fresh for her confrontation with Roberta. There was a cop at the X-shaped intersection of Hammond and Union Streets. The street light was out, which she thought typical of this running sore of a town. She stopped halfway across to ask him for directions to the best hotel or motel in town. The cop intended to remonstrate with her for holding up traffic in order to ask for directions, and then the look in her eyes, the warm look of fire in the brain, which has been well banked and might flare at any time, decided it might be less trouble to give her the directions and get rid of her. The lady looked like a dog the cop had known when he was a kid. A dog who had thought it fine fun to tear the seats from the pants of kids passing on the way to school. That kind of hassle on the day when both the temperature and his ulcer were too hot, he didn't need. He directed her to Cityscape Hotel out on Route 7 and was glad to see the ass end of her going the way. 4. Cityscape Hotel was full. That was no trouble for Sister Anne. She got herself a double, then bullied the harried manager into giving her another because the air conditioner in the first rattled and because the color TV was so bad. So bad, she said, that all the actors looked like they had just eaten shit and would soon die. She unpacked, masturbated to a grim and cheerless climax with a vibrator near the size of one of her mutant carrots in Bobby's garden. The only climax she had were the grim and cheerless type. She never had been in with a man in bed and never intended to. Showered, napped, then went to dinner. She scanned the menu with a darkening frown, then bared her teeth in a spitless grin at the waiter who came to take her order. Bring me a bunch of vegetables, raw, leafy vegetables. Madam wants Madam wants a bunch of raw, leafy vegetables. I don't give a shit what you call them. Just wash them first to get the bug piss off and bring me a sombrero right now. Yes, madam, the waiter said, licking his lips. People were looking at them. A few smiled, but those who got a look at Anne Anderson's eyes had soon stopped. The waiter started it away, and she called him back, her voice loud and even and undeniable. A sombrero, she said, has Kahlua and cream in it. Cream. If you bring me a sombrero with milk in it, chum, you're going to be shampooing with the motherfucker. The waiter's Adam's apple went up and down like a monkey on a stick. He tried to summon the sort of aristocratic, pitying smile, which is a good waiter's chief weapon against vulgar customers. Do him full credit. He got a pretty good start on the smile, then Anne's lips curved up into a grin and froze it dead. There was no good nature in that grin. There was something like murder in it. I mean it, chum, Sister Anne said softly, and the waiter believed her. 5. She was back in her room by 7:30. She undressed, put on a robe, and sat looking at the fourth story window. In spite of its name, Cityscape Hotel was actually far out on Banger's outskirts. The view Anne looked out on was, except for the lights in the small parking lot, one of almost almost alloying darkness. This was exactly the sort of view she liked. There were amphetamine capsules in her purse. Anne took one of them out, opened it, poured the white powder onto the mirror of her compact, made a line with one sensibly short nail, and snorted half of it. Oh. Well then. Oh, excessive. Okay, yeah, we don't need excessive, but we will put that in our little thing. We'll put that in there. Okay, go. And snorted half of it. Her heart immediately began to jackrabbit in her narrow chest. A flush of color bloomed in her pallid face. She left the rest for the morning. She had begun to use yellow jackets this way shortly after her father's first stroke. Now she found she could not sleep without a snort of the stuff, which was a diametric opposite of a sedative. When she had been a little girl, a very little girl, her mother had once cried at Anne in utter exasperation, "You're so contrary, cheesed physique, yeah." Anne supposed it had been true then, and that it was true now. Not that her mother would ever dare say it now, of course. Anne glanced at the phone and then away. Just looking at it made her think of Bobbi, of the way she had refused to come to father's funeral. Not in words, but in a cowardly way that was typical of her, by simply refusing to respond to Anne's increasingly urgent efforts to communicate with her. She had called twice during the 24 hours following the old bastard's stroke. When it became obvious he was going to snuff it, the phone had not been answered either time. She called again after her father died, this time at 1:04 in the morning on August 2nd. Some drunk had answered the telephone. "I'd like Roberta Anderson, please," Anne said. She stood stiffly at the payphone in the lobby of Utica's Soldier Hospital. Her mother sat in a nearby plastic chair, surrounded by endless brothers and endless sisters, with their endless Irish potato faces, weeping and weeping and weeping. Right now. Bobby, the drunk voice at the other end, said, "You want the old boss or the new improved boss? Spare me the bullshit, Gardner. Her father has—" "Can't talk to Bobby now," the drunk. It had been Gardner, all right. She recognized the voice now, broke in. Annie closed her eyes. There was only one piece of phone-related bad manners she hated worse than being broken in upon. She's out in the shed with the Dallas police. They're all getting even newer and more improved. You tell her, Sister Anne. Click. Dry rage turned the sides of her throat to heated flannel. She held the telephone handset away from her, looked at it the way a woman might look at a snake that had bitten her. Her fingernails were white, going on purple. The piece of phone manners she hated most was being hung up on. 6. She had dialed back at once, but this time, after a long pause, the telephone began to make a weird sirening noise in her ear. She hung up and went over to her weeping mother and her harp relatives. "Did you get your sissy?" her mother asked Anne. "Yes." "What did she say?" Her eyes begged Anne for good news. "Did she say she'd come for his funeral?" "I couldn't get a commitment one way or another," Anne said. And suddenly all of her fury at Roberta, who had had the temerity to try to escape, suddenly burst out in her heart, but not in shrillness. Anne would not be still or shrill. That shark-like grin surfaced on her face. The murmuring relatives grew silent and looked at Anne uneasily. 2 of the old ladies gripped their rosaries. She did say that she was glad the old bastard was dead, then laughed. Then she hung up. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then Paula Anderson clapped her hands to her ears and began to shriek. 7. Anne had had no doubt, at least at first, that Bobby would be at the funeral. Anne meant for her to be there. So she would be. Anne always got what she wanted. That made the world nice for her. But that was the way things should be. When Roberta did come, she would be confronted with the lie Anne had told, and probably not by her mother, who would be too pathetically, glad to see her to mention it, or probably even to remember it, but surely by one of the Harp uncles. Bobby would deny it, so the Harp uncle would probably let it go, unless the Harp uncle happened to be very drunk, which was always a good possibility with Mama's brothers. But they would all remember Anne's statement, not Bobby's denial. That was good. Fine, in fact. But not enough. It was time, overtime, that Roberta came home. Not just for the funeral, for good. She would see to it. Leave it to Sissy. 8. Sleep did not come easily to Anne that night in the cityscape. Part of it was being in a strange bed. Part of it was the dim gabble of TVs from other rooms and the sense of being surrounded by other people. Just another bee trying to sleep in just another chamber of this hive, where the chambers were square instead of hexagonal. Part of it knowing that tomorrow would be an extremely busy day. Most of it, however, was her continuing dull fury at being balked. It was the thing which she hated above all others. It reduced such annoyances to minor piffles. Bobby had balked her. So far she had balked her utterly and completely, necessitating this stupid trip during what the weather forecasters were calling the worst heat wave to hit New England since 1974. An hour after her lie about Bobby to her mother and the Harp aunts and uncles, she had tried to phone again, this time from the undertaker's. Her mother had long since tottered home, where Anne supposed she would be sitting with her cunt of a sister Betty, and the 2 of them drinking that shitty claret they liked, wailing over the dead man while they slopped. She got nothing but that sirening sound again. She called the operator and reported trouble on the line. "I want you to check it, locate the trouble, and see that it's corrected," Anne said. "There's been a death in the family, and I need to reach my sister as soon as possible." "Yes, ma'am, if you'll give me the number you're calling from." "I'm calling from the undertaker's," Anne said. "I'm going to pick out a coffin for my father and then go to bed. I'll call in the morning. Just make sure my calls go through, honey." She hung up and turned to the undertaker. Pine box, she said. Cheapest one you've got. But Miss Anderson, I'm sure you'll want to think about... I don't want to think about anything, Anne barked. She could feel the warning pulses which signaled the onset of one of her frequent nightmare headaches. Oh my gosh, frequent migraine headaches. Just sell me the cheapest pine box you've got so I can get the fuck out of here. It smells dead. But, the undertaker was flabbergasted. But won't you want to see? I'll see it when he's wearing it, Anne said, drawing her checkbook out of her purse. How much? 9. The next morning, Bobby's telephone was working, but there was no answer. There continued to be no answer all day. Anne grew steadily more angry. Around 4 p.m., it was with the wake in the next room going full blast. She had called main directory assistance and told the operator she wanted the number for the Haven Police Department. Well, there's no police department exactly, but I have a listing for the Haven Constable. Will that? Yeah, give it to me. The directory assistance operator did, and called. The phone rang. The tone of the ring was exactly the same tone she got when she dialed the house where her spineless sister had been hiding out for the last 13 years or so. A person could almost believe they were ringing into the same receiver. She actually toyed with the idea for a moment before brushing it aside, though giving such a paranoid thought even a moment's house room was unlike her, and it made her angrier. The ring sounded alike because the same little dipshit backwoods phone company sold and serviced all the phone equipment in town. That was all. Did you get her? Paula asked timidly, coming to the door. No. She doesn't answer. The town constable doesn't answer. I think the whole fucking town went to Bermuda. Jesus. She blew a lock of hair off her sweaty forehead. Perhaps if you called one of her friends. What friends? The loonies she's shacked up with? Sissy, you don't know. I know who answered the phone the one time I did get through, she returned grimly. After living in this family, it's easier for me to tell when a man's drunk by his voice. Her mother said nothing. She had been reduced to wet-eyed, trembling silence, one hand hovering at the collar of her black dress. And that was just how Anne liked her. No, he's there, and they both know I'm trying to get through and why, and they're going to be sorry they fucked with me. Sissy, I do wish you wouldn't use that Shut up, she screamed at her. And of course her mother did. Anne picked up the telephone again. This time when she dialed directory assistance, she asked for the number to the Haven mayor. They didn't have one of those either. They were something called a town manager, whatever the fuck that was. Muffled little clicks, like rat claws on glass, as the operator looked things up on her computer screen. Her mother had fled. From the other room came the theatrically overblown sobs and wails of Irish grief. Like a V-2 rocket, Anne thought. The Irish wake was powdered with liquid fuel, and in both cases the liquid was the same. Anne closed her eyes. Her head thumped. She ground her teeth together. It produced a bitter, metallic taste. She closed her eyes and imagined how good, how wonderful it would be to perform a little surgery on Bobby's face with her fingernails. Are you still there, honey? She asked without opening her eyes. Or did you suddenly run off to the WC? Yes, I have Give it to me. The operator was gone. A robot recited a number in odd, herky-jerky cadences, and dialed it. She fully expected no answer, but the phone was picked up promptly. Selectman's Newt Barringer here. Well, it's good to know someone's there. My name's Ann Anderson. I'm calling from Utica, New York. I tried to call your constable, but apparently he's gone fishing. Barringer's voice was even. He's a she, Miss Anderson. She died unexpectedly last month. The office hasn't been filled. Probably won't be until next town meeting. This stopped Anne for only an instant. She focused instead on something which interested her more. Ms. Anderson. How did you know I was Ms. Barringer? There was no pause, Barringer said. Ain't you Bobby's sister? If you are, and if you're married, you wouldn't be Anderson, would you? You know Bobby then, do you? Everyone in town knows Bobbi, Ms. Anderson. She's our resident celebrity. We're really proud of her. It went through the meat of Anne's brains like a sliver of glass. Our resident celebrity. Oh, dear bleeding Christ. Good job, Sherlock. I've been trying to reach her on whatever passes for phones up there in Moose Paw County to tell her father died yesterday and he's going to be buried tomorrow. She had expected some conventional sentiment from this faceless official. After all, he knew Bobbi, that there was none, but there was none. Then some trouble with the phones out her way, was all Berenger said. Anne was again more monetarily off pace, very momentarily. Anne was never put off pace for very long. The conversation was not going as she had expected. The man's responses were a little strange, too reserved even for a Yankee. She tried to picture him and couldn't. There was something very odd in his voice. Could you have her call me? Her mother is crying her eyes out in the other room. She's near collapse, and if Roberta doesn't get here in time for the funeral, I think she will collapse. Well, I can't make her call you, Miss Anderson, can I? Berenger returned, with infuriating, drawly slowness. Oh, come on, turn on. What are you doing, sitting on your cord? Easy. What in the heck? Why is my heater not turning on? There we go. My feet are starting to get cold. Excuse me. Drawly slowness. She's a grown woman, but I'll surely pass the message along. Maybe I'd better give you the number, Anne said through clenched teeth. I mean, we're still here at the same old stand, but she calls so seldom these days, she might have forgotten it. It's no need, Berenger interrupted. If she don't remember or have it written down, there's always directory assistance, ain't there? I guess that's how you must have gotten this'n. Anne hated the telephone because it allowed only a fraction of a full, relentless force of her personality to come through. She thought she had never hated it so much as she did at this moment. Listen, she cried. I don't think you understand. Think I do, Berenger said. This was the second interruption, and the conversation was not 3 minutes old. I'll go out for I have my dinner and pass it on. Thanks for calling, Miss Anderson. Listen, before she could finish, he did the thing she hated the most. Anne hung up, thinking she could cheerfully stand by and watch as the jagoff to whom she'd just been speaking was eaten alive by wild dogs. She had been grinding her teeth together madly. 10. Bobbi didn't return her call that afternoon, nor the early evening, as the V2 of the wake entered the boozosphere, nor that late evening as it went into orbit, nor in the 2 hours past midnight, as the last of the wakers stumbled blearily out of their cars, with which they would menace other drivers on their way home. Anne lay sleepless and ramrod straight in her bed most of the night, wired up on speed like a suitcase bomb, alternately grinding her teeth and digging her nails into her palms, planning revenge. You'll come back, Bobbi. Oh, yes, you will, and when you do. When she still hadn't called the next day, Anne put the funeral off in spite of her mother's weak wailings that it wasn't fitting. Finally, Anne whirled on her and snarled, I'll say what's fitting and what isn't. What's fitting is that that little whore should be here, and she hasn't been bothered to call. Now leave me alone. Her mother slunk away. That night she tried first Bobbi's number, then the selectman's office. At the first number, the sirening sound continued. At the second, she got a recorded message. She waited patiently until the beep and then said, It's Bobbi's sis again, Mr. Berenger. Cordially hoping that you'll be afflicted with syphilis that won't be diagnosed until your nails fall off and your balls turn black. She called directory assistance back and asked for 3 Haven numbers. The number for New Berenger, a Smith, any Smith, dear. In Haven, they're all related. And a Brown, a number she received in response to the last request, by virtue of alphabetical order, Bryant's. She got the same siren howl at each number. Shit, Anne yelled, and threw the phone at the wall. Upstairs in bed, her mother cringed and hoped Bobbi would not come home, at least not until Anne was in a better mood. 11. She had put the funeral and the intermittent off until yet another day. The relatives began to rumble, but Anne was more than equal to them. Thank you. The funeral director took one look at her and decided the old Mick would rot in his pine box before he got involved. Anne, who spent the whole day on the phone, would have congratulated him on making a wise decision. Her fury was rapidly passing all previous bounds. Now all the phones in Haven seemed out of service. She would not delay the funeral another day longer, and she knew it. Oh, she could not, excuse me. Bobby had won his battle. All right, so be it. But not the war. Oh, no. If she thought that, the bitch had several more things coming, and all of them would be painful. Anne bought her plane tickets angrily, but confidently. One from upstate New York to Bangor, and 2 returns. 12. She would have flown to Bangor the following day. That was when the ticket was for, but her idiotic mother fell down the back stairs and broke her hip. Sean O'Casey had once said that when you lived with the Irish, you marched in a fool's parade. And oh, how right he had been. Her mother's screams brought Anne in from the backyard, where she had been laying on a chaise lounge, soaking up some sun and going over her strategy for keeping Bobbi in Utica once she had gotten her here. Her mother was sprawled out on the bottom of the narrow staircase, bent at the hideous angle, and Anne's first thought was that for a row of pins, she could gladly have left the stupid old bitch there until the anesthetic effects of the claret began to wear off. The new widow smelled like a winery. In that angry, dismayed moment, Anne knew that all of her plans would have to be changed, and she thought that her mother might actually have done it on purpose, gotten drunk to nerve herself up, and then not just fallen but jumped downstairs. Why? To keep her from Bobby, of course. But you won't, she had thought, going to the phone. You won't. If I want a thing to be, if I mean a thing to be, that thing will be. I'm going to Haven. I'm going to cut a wide swath there. I'm going to bring Bobby back, and they're going to remember me for a long time, especially the hayseed dork who hung up on me. She picked up the phone and punched the medic's number. It had been pasted to the phone ever since her father's first stroke. With quick, angry stabs of her forefinger, she was grinding her teeth. 13. Thus, it was the 9th of August, before she could finally get away. In the Caesura, I don't know what that word is, Caesura? I guess it's Caesura. There was no call from Bobby, and Anne didn't try to get her again. Or the hick town manager, or Bobby's drunk fuck in Troy. She had apparently moved in so she could poke her full time. Okay. Let them both fall into a lull. Oh, he had apparently moved in so he could poke her full time. Let them both fall into a lull. They would be very fine. That would be very fine. Now she was here in Bangor's Cityscape Hotel, sleeping badly and grinding her teeth. She had always ground her teeth. Sometimes it was so loud it woke her mother in the night. On the few occasions, even her father, who slept like a brick. Her mother mentioned it to the family doctor when Anne was 3. That fellow, a venerable upstate New York GP, whom Doc Warwick would have felt right at home with, looked surprised. He considered a moment, then said, I think you must be imagining that, Mrs. Anderson. If I am, it must be catching, Paula had said. My husband's heard it too. They looked toward Anne, who was building a shaky tower of blocks, one on top of the other. She worked with grim, unsmiling concentration, and as she added a 6th block, the tower fell down, and as she started to rebuild it, they heard the grim, skeletal sound of Anne grinding her baby teeth together. She also does that in her sleep, the doctor. She also does that in her sleep, the doctor asked. Paula Anderson nodded. Well, it'll probably go away, the doctor said. It's harmless. But of course it didn't go away, and it wasn't harmless. It was bruxism, a malady which, along with heart attacks, strokes, and ulcers, often afflicts driven, self-assertive people. The first of Anne's baby teeth had fallen out, was noticeably eroded. To fall out was noticeably eroded. Her parents commented on it, then forgot it. But then Anne's personality had begun to assert itself in more gaudy and startling ways. By 6 and a half, she was already ruling the Anderson family in some strange way you could never quite put your finger on, and they had all gotten used to the thin, slightly gruesome whisper of Anne's teeth grinding together in the night. The family dentist had noticed the problem wasn't going away, but getting worse by the time Anne was 9. But it wasn't treated until she was 15, when it began to cause her actual pain. By then, she had worn her teeth down to the live nerves. The dentist fitted her with a rubber mouth splint taken from the mold of her teeth, then an acrylic one. She wore these appliances, which were called night guards, to bed every night. She wore them every night. At 18, she was fitted with all-metal crowns on most of her top and bottom teeth. The Andersons couldn't afford it, but Annie insisted. They had allowed the problem to slide, and she was not going to allow her skinflint father to turn around when she was 21 and say, "You're grown up now, Anne. It's your problem. If you want crowns, you pay the bill." Hold on, I need my water. Mouth was dry. She'd wanted gold, but that really was beyond their means. For several years thereafter, Anne's infrequent smiles had a glittery, mechanized look that was extremely startling. People often actually coiled from that grin. She took a grim enjoyment from these reactions, and when she had seen the villain Jaws in one of the later James Bond movies, she had laughed until she thought her sides would split. This unaccustomed burst of amusement had left her feeling dizzy and ill. She had understood exactly why. When that huge man first bared his stainless steel teeth in a shark-like grin, people had recoiled from her. What? Okay. Oh, people had recoiled from her, and she almost wished she hadn't finally had porcelain fused over the metal. Yet, she thought, it was perhaps better not to show oneself so clearly. It could be as unwise to wear your personality on your sleeve as it was to wear your heart there. Maybe you didn't have to look as though you could chew your way through a door made of oak planks to get what you wanted, as long as you knew you could. Bruxism aside, Annie also had a lot of cavities, both as a child and as an adult, in spite of Utica's fluoridated water and her own strictly observed regimen of oral hygiene. She often flossed her teeth against her gums until her gums bled. This was also due in large part to her personality rather than her physiology. Drive and the urge to dominate afflict both the soft parts of the human body, stomach and vitals, and the hardest, the teeth. Anne had a chronic case of dry mouth. Her tongue was nearly white. Her teeth were dry little islands, without a steady flow of saliva to wash away crumbs of food. Cavities began quickly. But this night, when she lay uneasily in Bangor, Anne had better than 12 ounces of saliva amalgam fillings in her mouth. Oh, silver amalgam fillings in her mouth. On infrequent occasions, she had set off airport metal detectors. In the last 2 years, she had begun to lose teeth in spite of her fanatic efforts to save them. 2 on the top right, 3 on the bottom left. In both cases, she had opted for the most expensive dental bridge work available. She had traveled to New York City to have the work done. The dental surgeon removed the rotting husks, flayed her gums to a dull white of the jawbone, and implanted tiny titanium screws. The gums were sewn back together and healed nicely. Some people reject metal implants in the bone, but Anne Anderson had no trouble at all accepting them, leaving 2 little titanium posts sticking out of the flesh. The bridge work was placed over the metal anchors after the flesh around them had healed. She didn't have as much metal in her head as Guard did. Guard's plate always set off airport metal detectors, but she had a lot. So she slept without knowing that she was a member of the extremely exclusive club, those people who could enter Haven as it was now with a bare chance of surviving. 14. She left for Haven in her rental car at 8 the following morning. She made one wrong turn, but still arrived at the Troy Haven town line by 9:30. She had awakened feeling as nervous and randy-dandy as a thoroughbred, dancing her way into the starting gate. But somewhere, in the last 15 or 20 miles before she reached the Haven town line, the land around her nearly empty, dreamily ripe in the breathless summer heat-hush. That fine feeling of anticipation and wire-thin, nervy readiness had bled away. Her head began to ache. At first it was just a minor throb, but it quickly escalated into a familiar pounding of one of her near migraines. She drove past the town line into Haven. By the time she got to the Haven village, she was hanging on to herself by force of will and not much more. The headache came and went in sickish waves. Once she thought she had heard a burst of hideously distorted music coming out of her mouth, but that must have been imagination, something brought on by the headache. She was faintly aware of the people on the streets in the little village, but not of the way they all turned to look at her, then each other. She could hear machinery throbbing in the woods somewhere. The sound was distant and dreamlike. The cutlass began to weave back and forth on the deserted road. Images doubled, trebled, more reluctantly back together, then again doubling and trebling. Blood trickled from the corners of her mouth unnoticed. She held hard to one thought. It's on this road, Route 9, and her name will be on the mailbox. It's on this road, Route 9, and her name will be on the mailbox. It's on this road. The road was mercifully deserted. Haven slept in the morning sun. 90% of the out-of-town traffic had been rerouted now, and this was a good thing for Anne, whose car pitched and yawed wildly. Left-hand wheels now spuming dust from one shoulder, right-hand wheels spuming dust from the other a few moments later. She knocked down a turn sign without being aware of it. Young Ashley Reval saw her coming and pulled her bike a prudent distance off the road, and stood astride it in Justin Hurd's north pasture until she was gone. There's a lady, and I can't hear her except her pain. 100 voices answered him, soothing him. We know, Ashley, it's all right. Shh, shh. Ashley grinned, exposing his pink, baby-smooth gums. 15. Her stomach revolted. Somehow she was able to pull over and shut off the engine before her breakfast bolted up and out the moment after she managed to claw the driver's door open. For a moment she just hung there with her forearms propped on the open window of the half-open door, bent awkwardly outward, conscious no more than a single spark, which she managed by her determination that it would not go out. At last she was able to straighten up and pull the door closed. She thought in a dim and confused way that it must have been breakfast. Headaches she was used to, but she almost never threw up. Breakfast in the restaurant of that flea bag that was supposed to be Bangor's best hotel. The bastards had poisoned her. I may be dying. Oh, God, yes, it really feels as if I might be dying. But if I'm not, I'm going to sue them from here to the steps of the U.S. Supreme Court. If I live, I'll make them wish their mothers never met their fathers. Perhaps it was the bracing quality of her thought which made Anne feel strong enough to get the car moving again. She crept along at 35, looking for a mailbox with Anderson written on it. A terrible idea came to her. Suppose Bobbi had painted out her name on the mailbox. It wasn't so crazy when you really thought about it. She might well suspect Sissy would turn up, and the spineless little twat had always been afraid of her. She was in no shape to stop at every farm along the way, inquiring after Bobbi. Not that she'd get much help from Bobbi's hayseed neighbors if a donkey she'd spoken to on the phone was any indication, but there were Anderson. and behind it, a place she had seen only in photographs. Uncle Frank's place. The Garrick farm. There was a blue truck parked in the driveway. The place was right, yes, but the light was wrong. She realized this clearly for the first time as she approached the driveway. Instead of feeling the triumph she had expected at this moment, the triumph of a predator that has finally succeeded in running its prey to earth, she felt confusion, uncertainty, and although she did not even really realize it for what it was because it was so unfamiliar, the first faint trickle of fear. The light. The light was wrong. This realization brought others in quick succession. Her stiff neck, the circles of sweat darkening her dress under her arms, and her hands flew to her crotch. There was a faint dampness there, drying now, and she isolated a dim ammoniac smell in the car. It had been there for some time, but her conscious mind had just not tumbled to it. I pissed myself. And I've been in this fucking car almost long enough for it to dry. And the light, Anne. The light was wrong. It was sunset light. Oh no, it's 9:30 in the... But it was sunset light. There was no denying it. She had felt better after vomiting, yes, and she suddenly understood why. The knowledge had been there all along, really, just waiting to be noticed, like the patches of sweat under the arms of her dress, or that faint smell of drying urine. She had felt better because the period between closing the door and actually starting the car again hadn't been seconds or minutes, but hours. She had spent all that brutally hot summer day in the oven of the car. She had lain in a death-like stupor, and if she had been using the Cutlass's air conditioning with all the windows rolled up when she stopped the car, she would have cooked. She would have cooked like a Thanksgiving turkey. But her sinuses were nearly as bad as her teeth, and the canned air manufactured by automobile air conditioners irritated them. This physical problem, she realized suddenly, staring at the old farm with wide, bloodshot eyes, had probably saved her life. She had been running with all 4 windows open. Otherwise, this led to another thought. She had spent the day in a death-like stupor, parked on the side of the road, and no one had stopped to check on her? That no one had come along a main road like Route 9 in all those hours since 9:30 was something she just couldn't accept. Not even out in the sticks. And when they did see you in trouble in Sticksville, they didn't just put the pedal to the metal and keep on going, like New Yorker stepping on a wino. What kind of town is this, anyway? That unaccustomed trickle again, that hot acid in her stomach. This time she recognized the feeling as fear, seized it, wrung its neck, and killed it. Its brother might show up later on, and if so, she would kill it too, and all the sibs that might follow. She drove into the yard. 16. Anne had met Jim Gardner only twice before, but she never forgot a face. Even so, she barely recognized the great poet, although she believed she could have smelled him at 40 yards if she had been downwind on even a moderately breezy day. He was sitting on the porch in a strappy t-shirt and a pair of blue jeans. An open-up bottle of scotch in one hand. He had a 3 or 4 day beard of stubble, much of it gray. His eyes were bloodshot, although Anne didn't know this, and wouldn't have cared. Gardner had been in this state, more or less, for the past 2 days. All his noble resolves had gone by the boards since finding the dog hairs on Bobby's jacket. He watched the car pull into the dooryard, missing the mailbox by bare inches, with a drunk's bleary lack of surprise. He watched the woman get out, stagger, and hold on to the open door for a minute. Oh wow, Gardner thought. It's a bird, it's a plane, it's super bitch. Faster than a speeding hate letter, able to leap cringing family members in a single bound. And shoved the car door closed. She stood there for a moment, throwing a long shadow, and Gardner felt an eerie sense of familiarity. She looked like Ron Cummings when Ron had a skinful and was trying to decide if he should walk across the room. Anne made her way across the dooryard, trailing a steady hand along the side of Bobby's truck. When she had passed the truck, she reached out once for the porch railing. She looked up, and in the slanting light of 7 o'clock, Gardner thought the woman looked both aged and ageless. She also looked evil, he thought, jaundiced and yellowish black, with a heavy freight of evil that was simultaneously wearing her out and eating her up. He raised the scotch, drank, gagged on the rank burn. Then he tipped the neck of it at her. "Hello, sissy, welcome to Haven. Having said that much, I now urge you to leave as fast as you can." 17. She got up on the first 2 steps, okay, then stumbled and went to one knee. Gardner held out a hand. She ignored it. "Where's Bobby?" "You don't look so good," Gard said. "Haven has that effect on people these days." "I'm fine," she said, at last gaining the porch. She stood over him, panting. "Where is she?" Gardner inclined his head toward the house. The steady hiss of water coming from one of the open windows. "Shower?" "We've been working in the woods all day, and it was extremely hot. Bobby believes in showering to remove dirt." Gardner raised the bottle again. "I believe in simply disinfecting it. Shorter and pleasanter." "You smell like a dead pig," Anne remarked. Started past him toward the house. "Well, my own nose is undoubtedly not as keen as your own, dear heart. You have a delicate but noticeable odor of your own," Gard said. "What do the French call that particular perfume? Eau de pisse?" She turned on him, startled into a snare. People in Utica at least, didn't speak it to her that way. Never. But of course, they knew her. The great poet had undoubtedly judged her on the basis of his jizz receptacle, Haven's resident celebrity, and he was a drunk. "Well," Gardner said, amused, but also a trifle uneasy under her smoking gaze. "It was you who brought up the subject of aroma." "So I did," she said slowly. "Maybe we ought to start again," he said, with drunken courtesy. "Start what again? You're the great poet. You're the drunk who shot his wife. I have nothing to say to you. I came for Bobby." "Good shot, the thing about the wife." She saw his face freeze, saw his hands tighten on the neck of the bottle. He stood there as if he had at least temporarily forgotten where he was. She offered him a sweet smile. That smart-ass crack about Eau de pisse had gotten through. But sick or not, she thought, she was still ahead on points. Inside, the shower shut off, and perhaps it was only a hunch. Gardner had a clear sense of Bobby listening. "You always did like to operate without anesthetic. I guess I never got anything but exploratory surgery before this, huh?" "Maybe. Why not? After all these years. Why did you have to pick now?" "None of your business." "Bobby's my business." They faced each other. She drilled him with her gaze. She waited for his eyes to drop. They didn't. It suddenly occurred to her that if she started into the house without saying more, he might attempt to restrain her. It wouldn't do him any good. But it might be simpler to answer his question. What difference did it make? "I've come to take her home." Silence again. There were no crickets. "Let me give you a piece of advice, Sister Anne. Spare me. No candy from strangers, no advice from drunks. Do exactly what I told you when you got out of the car and leave. Now, just go. This is not a good place to be right now." There was something in his eyes, something desperately honest, that brought on a recurrence of her earlier chill and that unaccustomed confusion. She had been left all day in her car at the side of the road as she lay in a swoon. What sort of people did that? Then every bit of her Anness rose up and crushed these little doubts. If she wanted a thing to be, if she meant a thing to be, the thing would be. So it had been, was, and ever would be. Hallelujah, amen. "Okay, chumley," she said. "You gave me yours. I'll give you mine. I'm going inside that shack, and about 2 minutes later, a very large chunk of shit is going to hit the fan. I suggest you go for a walk, and if you don't want to get splattered." sit on a rock somewhere and watch the sun go down and jerk off or think up rhymes or do whatever it is great poets do when they watch the sunset. But you want to keep out of what goes on in this house no matter what. It's between Bobbi and me. If you get in my way, I'll rip you up. Hello.
Look at that. The screen.
Mm-hmm. What's up?
Can you spray this? Like, make
Why?
a symbol of Autobot symbol?
Why?
So can I be happy?
I might be able to color one.
Oh, you mean like color one on this?
Use a marker, yeah.
Can you do that?
Not at this moment, but I can try when I'm done.
Done reading?
When I'm done reading, I want to eat, and then I'll try.
Can I make you something to eat?
No, because I'm reading.
Yeah,
I don't eat. I don't eat and read.
But I can save you something like eggs.
Okay. In Haven, you're more than likely to be rippy than the Ripper.
How many do you want, Mom? How many eggs?
Well, that's something I'll have to see for myself, even though I'm not from Missouri, Anne said. What?
What eggs?
Just a little. You scrambling them?
What?
Scrambling them?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you.
I made 3 eggs for myself.
All right. How many eggs are left?
That's tag.
Is that the last carton?
Yeah, sorry. There's 4 of them.
All right. Well, I gotta have your dad get eggs and butter anyway.
So, I don't finish them up, if that was me.
No, just 2. That way your dad can have 2. Anne said and started for the door. Gardner tried once more. Anne, Sissy, Bobbi's not the same. She, take a walk, little man, Anne said and went inside. 18. The windows were open, but for some reason the shades were drawn. Every now and then a puff of faint breeze would stir, sucking the shades into the openings a little way. When it happened, they looked like the sails of a becalmed ship doing their best and failing. Anne sniffed and wrinkled her nose. Blah, the place smelled like a monkey house. From the great poet, she would have expected it, but her sister had been raised better. This place was a pigsty. Hello, Sissy. She turned. For a moment, Bobbi was just a shadow, and Anne felt her heart go into her throat, because there was nothing odd about that shape. Something all wrong. Oh, there was something odd. Then she saw the white blur of her sister's robe, heard the patter of water, and understood that Bobbi had just come from the shower. She was all but naked. Good. But her pleasure was not as good as it should have been. Her unease remained. Her feeling that there was something wrong about the shape in the doorway. This is not a good place to be right now. Daddy's dead, she said.
You know I'm part of the
yes, I know. I understand. Daddy's dead, she said, straining her eyes to see better. For all her straining, Bobbi remained only a dim figure in the doorway, which communicated between living room and, she assumed, bathroom. I know, New Behringer called and told me. Something about her voice. Something even more basically different in that the vague suggestiveness of her shape. Then it came to her. Realization brought a nasty shock and stronger fear. She didn't sound afraid. The first time in her life, Bobbi didn't sound afraid of her. We buried him without you. Your mother died a little when you didn't come home, Bobbi. She waited for Bobbi to defend herself. There was only silence. For Christ's sake, come out where I can see you, you little coward. And Bobbi's not the same. She fell downstairs 4 days ago and broke her hip. Did she? Bobbi asked indifferently. You're coming home with me, Bobbi, she meant to convey force, and was appalled by the weak shrillness of her voice. It was your teeth that let you get in, Bobbi said. Of course. I should have thought of that. Bobbi, get out here where I can see you. You want me to? Her voice had taken on a strong, teasing lilt. I wonder if you do. Stop fucking with me, Bobbi. Her voice rose unevenly. Oh, listen, Bobbi said. I never thought I'd hear anything like that from you, Anne. After all these years, you fucked with me. With all of us. But okay, if you insist. If you insist, that's fine. Just fine. Nick, do me a favor.
Yeah, I'm trying to wash this off.
Here, look in the drawer for another one. We got to do dishes anyway.
We only have those things with this part.
I don't know what you mean.
With spoons.
Okay. Hey, can I have some water? Thank you. No, thank you. She didn't want to see. Suddenly Anne didn't want anything but to run. And keep running until she was far from the shadowy place in this town where they left you fainting all day on the side of the road. But it was too late. She saw the blurred movement of her younger sister's hand, and the lights went on at the same moment the robe dropped with a soft rustle. The shower had washed off the makeup. Bobbi's entire head and neck were transparent and jelly-like. Her breast had swelled bulbously outward and seemed to be merging into one single nippleless outcropping of flesh. Anne could see dim organs in Bobbi's stomach that looked nothing at all like human organs. There was fluid circulating in there, but it looked green. Behind Bobbi's forehead, she could see the quivering sac of mind. Bobbi grinned toothlessly. "Welcome to Haven, Anne," she said. She felt herself stepping backward in a spongy dream. She was trying to scream, but there was no air. At Bobbi's crotch, a grotesque thatch of tentacles, like seagrass, wavered from her vagina. The place where her vagina had been, anyway. Anne had no idea that it was still there or not, and didn't care. The sunken valley, which had replaced her crotch, was enough. That, and the way the tentacles seemed to be pointing toward her, reaching for her. Naked, Bobbi began walking toward her. Anne tried to back away and stumbled over a footstool. "No," she whispered, trying to crawl away. "No, Bobbi, no." "Good to have you here," Bobbi said, still smiling. "I hadn't counted on you, not at all. But I think we can find a job for you. Positions, as they say, are still open." "Bobbi," she managed this one final, terrified whisper, and then she felt the tentacles moving lightly on her body. She jerked, tried to move away, and then they slithered around her wrists. Bobbi's hips thrust out in a movement that was like an obscure parody of copulation. Let's see, how long is this chapter? Yeah, I think we're going to read 2. 2. Gardner takes a walk. 1. Gardner took Annie's advice and went for a walk. He went, in fact, all the way out to the ship in the woods. This was the first time.
A burrito time.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I can put in the microwave.
Have some water, please? Water, syrup, in a fork.
Okay.
Thank you, sweetheart.
Can I have you make the cookies?
We can't make them right now, not until we get eggs and butter. He went, in fact, all the way out to the ship in the woods. This was the first time he had been out here by himself, he realized, and it would soon be full dark. He felt vaguely afraid, as a child might passing near a haunted house. Are there ghosts in there? The ghosts of Tommyknockers past? Or are the Tommyknockers themselves still in there? Maybe in suspended animation, beings like freeze-dried coffee waiting to be thawed out. And just what were they, anyhow? He sat on the ground by the lean-to, looking at the ship. After a while, the moon rose and lit. Did you put it from the sink? Or from the fridge, I mean?
Yeah.
Thank you, honey. I appreciate it.
Okay, some syrup. Don't forget ketchup.
Okay? No, I want syrup.
No, when you get syrup.
Okay.
I mean ketchup.
Okay. He sat on the ground by the lean-to, looking at the ship. After a while, the moon rose and lit its surface, an even more ghostly silver. It was strange and yet very beautiful. What's going on around here? I don't want to know. What it is ain't exactly clear. I don't want to know. Hey, stop. What's that sound?
Hey, here you go.
Everybody look what's going down.
And here's your fork. gonna do?
I don't want it right in front of me, but thank you. All right.
You might want
Go
to put it
ahead.
on that side.
Yeah, I'm gonna put it on this side. There you go. What's that up? Thank you, honey. I'll eat in a minute.
Yeah.
Hey, stop. What's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. He tipped the bottle up and drank deep. He put it aside. Thank you. Rolled over and rested his throbbing head on his arms. He fell asleep that way, in the woods near the graceful circular jet of the ship. He slept there all night. In the morning, there were two teeth on the ground. It's what I get for sleeping so close to it, he thought dully. Yes.
I might have some eggnog. But when everyone was...
How much?
I just used a small cup.
Okay. All right. As long as there's eggnog left. He thought dully. How many did you have? Okay. That's fine. That's fine.
So I cannot have another one.
Not yet. You gotta let your dad and your sister have some. Jeez.
Yeah, I know.
But there was at least one compensation. He had no headache at all, although he had put away nearly a fifth of scotch. He had noticed before that, all its other attributes aside, the ship, or change in the atmosphere the ship had generated, seemed at very close range to provide hangover protection. He didn't want to leave his teeth just lying there. Heeding an obscure urge, he kicked dirt over them. As he did it, he thought again. Playing Hamlet is a luxury you can no longer afford, guard, if you don't commit to one course or the other very soon. In the next day or so, I think. You're not going to be able to do anything but march along with the rest of them. What?
Looking for those drinking packets, but I guess we're out.
Probably. Look and see if there's Kool-Aid anywhere. He looked at the ship, thought of the deep ravine which extended down its smooth, unmarked side, and thought again. We'll be down to the hatchway soon, if there is a hatchway. What then? Rather than trying to answer, he snuck off for home. 2. The cutlass was gone. Where were you last night, Bobbi asked Gardner. I slept in the woods. Did you get really drunk? Bobbi asked with surprising gentleness. Her face was dark with makeup again, and Bobbi had been wearing shirts which seemed oddly loose and baggy the last few days. This morning he thought he could see why. Her chest was thickening. Her breasts had begun to look like a single unit instead of two separate things. It made Garner think of guys who pumped iron. Not very. 1 or 2 nips, and I passed out. No hangover this morning, and no bug bites. He raised his arms, darkly tanned on top, white and strangely vulnerable beneath. Any other summer, you'd wake up next morning so bug bit you couldn't open your eyes. But now they're gone, along with the birds and the beasts. In fact, Roberta, it seems to repel everything but fools like us. Have you changed your mind, Guard? You keep asking me that. Have you noticed? Bobbi didn't reply. Did you hear the news on the radio yesterday? He knew she hadn't. Bobbi didn't see, hear, or think about anything now but the ship. Her head shake was no surprise. Troops massing in Libya, or fighting in Lebanon. American troop movements. The Russians getting louder and louder about SDI. We're all still sitting on a powder keg. That hasn't changed a bit since 1945 or so. Then you discover a Deus Machina in your backyard, and now you keep wanting to know if I've changed my mind about using it. Have you? No, Gardner said. Not sure if he was lying or not, but he was very glad Bobbi couldn't read him. Oh, can't she? I think she can. Not much, but more than she could a month ago. More and more each day. Because you're becoming now, too. Changed your mind? That's a laugh. You can't fucking make up your mind. Bobbi dismissed it, or appeared to do so. She turned toward a pile of hand tools stacked in the corner of the porch. She had missed making up a spot just below her right ear. Gardner saw. It was the same spot many men missed when they were shaving. He realized with a sickish lack of surprise that he could see into Bobbi. Her skin had changed. had become kind of semi-transparent jelly. Bobbi had grown thicker, shorter over the last few days, and changes were accelerating. God, he thought, horrified and bitterly amused. Is that what happens when you turn into a Tommyknocker? You start looking like someone who got caught in a great big messy atomic meltdown? Bobbi, who had been bending over the tools and gathering them in her arms, turned quickly to look at Gardner, her face wary. What? I said, let's get moving, you lazy juggins. Gardner sent clearly, and that weary, puzzled expression became a reluctant smile. Okay, help me with these then. Now, of course, victims of high gamma radiation didn't turn transparent, like Claude Rains in The Invisible Man. They didn't start to lose inches as their bodies twisted and thickened. But yes, they were apt to lose teeth. Their hair was apt to fall out. In other words, there was a kind of physical becoming in both cases. He thought again, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. Bobbi was looking narrowly at him again. I'm running out of maneuvering room, all right, and fast. What did you say, guard? I said, let's go, boss. After a long moment, Bobbi nodded. Yeah, said daylight's wasting. 3. They rode out to the dig on the Tomcat. It did not fly the way the little boy's bike had flown in E.T. Bobby's tractor would never soar cinematically in front of the moon, hundreds of feet above the rooftops. But it did cruise silently and handily, 18 inches above the ground, large wheels spinning slowly like Dian propellers. It smoothed the ride out the whole hell of a lot. Guard was driving, Bobbi standing behind him on the yoke. Your sister left? Guard said. There's no need to yell. The Tomcat's engine was a faint, distant purr. That's right, Bobbi said. She left. Still can't lie worth shit, Bobbi, and I really do, that I heard her scream, just before I hit the patch going into the woods. I think I heard her scream. How much would it take to make a high-steppin', purity, ball-cuttin' bitch like Sissy let out a howl? How bad would it have to be? The answer to that was very easy, very bad. She was never the type to exit gracefully, Bobbi said, or to let anyone be graceful if she could help it. She came to bring me home, you know. Watch that stump, Guard. It's a high one. Guard shoved the gear lever all the way up. The Tomcat rose another 3 inches, skimming over the top of the high stump. Once past, he relaxed his hand and the Tomcat sunk back to its previous altitude, 18 inches above the ground. Yes, she just came up with her bit and her hackamore, Bobbi said, sounding faintly amused. There was a time when she might have taken me, too. As things are now, she never had a chance. Gardner felt cold. There were a lot of ways people could interpret a remark like that, weren't there? I'm still surprised that it took you only one evening to convince her, Gardner said. I thought Patricia McCardle was bad, but your sister made old Patty look like Annie. There we go. I just wiped off some of this makeup. When she saw what was underneath, she screamed and left as fast as she would have thought there were as fast as you so fast you would have thought there were rockets in her heels. It was actually pretty funny. It was plausible. It was so plausible that the temptation to believe it was almost insuperable, unless you ignored the simple fact that the lady under discussion couldn't have been anywhere in a hurry without help. The lady could barely walk without help. No, Gardner thought, she never left. The only question is whether you killed her, or if she's out in the garden shed with Peter. How long do the physical changes go on, Bobbi? Gardner asked. Not much longer, Bobbi said. And Gardner thought again that Bobbi had never been able to lie worth shit. Here we are. Park it over by the lean-to. 4. Yeah, we only got a couple more pages and then we'll stop for this morning. 4. The following evening they knocked off early. The heat was still holding, and neither of them felt capable of going on until the last light died. They returned to the house, pushed food around on their plates, even ate some of it. With the dishes washed, Gardner said he thought he would go for a walk. Oh, Bobbi was looking at him. with a wary expression which had become one of her main stocks in trade. I would have thought you'd gotten enough exercise today for anyone. Sun's down now, Guard said easily. It's cooler, no bugs, and he looked clear-eyed at Bobbi. If I go out on the porch, I'm going to take a bottle. If I take a bottle, I'm going to get drunk. And if I go for a long walk, come back tired, maybe I'll fall into bed sober for one night. All of this was true enough, but there was another truth nested inside it. Like one Chinese box inside another, Gardner looked at Bobbi and waited to see if she would go hunting for that inner box. She didn't. All right, she said, but you know I don't care how much you drink, Guard. I'm your friend, not your wife. No, you don't care how much I drink. You've made it very easy for me to drink all I want, because it neutralizes me. He walked along Route 9, past Justin Hurd's place, and when he struck the Nista Road, he turned left and moved along at a good pace, his arm swinging easily. The last month's labor had toughened him more than he would have believed. Not so long ago, even a 2-mile walk like this would have left him rubber-legged and winded. Still, it was eerie. No whippoorwills greeted the encroaching twilight. No dog barked at him. Most of the houses were dark. No TVs flickered inside the few lighted windows he passed. Who needs Barney Miller reruns when you can become instead, Gardner thought. By the time he reached the sign reading road ends 200 yards, it was almost full dark. But the moon was rising and the night was very bright. At the end of the road he reached a heavy chain strung between two posts. A rusty, bullet-holed, no trespassing sign hung from it. Guard stepped over the chain, kept walking, and was soon standing in an abandoned gravel pit. The moonlight on its weedy side was white as bone. The silence made Gardner's scalp prickle. What had brought him here? His own becoming, he supposed. Something he had picked out of Bobbi's mind without even knowing he'd done it. It must have been that, because whatever had brought him out here had been a lot stronger than just a hunch. To the left there was a thick triangular scar against the whiteness of the undisturbed gravel. This stuff has been moved around. Gardner walked over, shoes crunching. He dug into the fresher gravel, found nothing, moved, dug another hole, found nothing, moved, dug a third, found nothing. Oh, hey, wait a minute. His finger stemmed across something much too smooth to be a stone. He leaned over, heart thudding, and could see nothing. He wished he had brought a flashlight, but that probably would have made Bobbi even more suspicious. He dug wider, letting the dirt run and rattle down the inclined slope. He saw he had uncovered a car headlight. Gardner looked at it, filled with an eerie, skeletal amusement. This is what it was like to find something in the earth, he thought. To find some strange artifact. Only, I didn't have to stumble over it, did I? I knew where to look. He dug faster, climbing the slope and throwing dirt back between his legs like a mutt digging for a bone, ignoring his pounding head, ignoring his hands, which first scraped, then chafed, then began to bleed. He was able to see a clear, level place at the cutlass's hood just above the right side headlights, where he could stand. Then the work went faster. Bobbi and her buddies had done a casual burial job at best. Gardner pulled the loose gravel down by the armload, then kicked it off the car. Pebbles shrieked and squealed on the metalwork. His mouth was dry. He was working his way up to the windshield, and he honestly didn't know which would be better, to see something or nothing. His fingers brushed slick smoothness again, without allowing himself to stop and think. The silent creepiness of the place might have gotten to him then. He might just have turned and run. He dug a clear place on the windshield and peered in, cutting his hands to the glass to cut the glare from the moon. Nothing. Ann Anderson's rented cutlass was empty. They could have put her in the trunk. The fact is, we still don't know anything for sure. He thought he did, however. Logic told him that Anne's body wasn't in the trunk. Why would they bother? Anyone who found a brand new car buried out here in the deserted gravel pit was going to find it suspicious enough to investigate the trunk, or to call the police. Who would do it? No one in Haven would give a rip one way or another. They have concerns more pressing than cars buried in gravel pits right now. And if someone from town did happen to find it, calling the police is the last thing they'd do. That would mean outsiders. And we wouldn't want any outsiders in Haven this summer, do we? We don't want, perish the thought. So, she wasn't in the trunk. Simple logic, QED. Maybe the people who did this didn't have your sterling powers of logic, guard. That was a crock of shit, too. If he could see a thing from 3 angles, the Haven quiz kids could see it from 23. They didn't miss a trick. Gardner backed to the edge of the hood on his knees and jumped down. Now he was aware of his scraped, burning hands. He would have to take a couple of aspirin when he got back to try to conceal the damage from Bobbi in the morning. Work gloves were going to be in order for the day, all day. Anne wasn't in the car. Where was Anne? In the shed, of course. In the shed. Gardner suddenly understood why he had come out here. Not just to confirm a thought he had plucked from Bobbi's head. And that was what he had done. His subconscious mind might simply have fixed on this as the handiest place to get rid of a big car quick. But because he had needed to make sure that it was the shed, because he had a decision to make, and he knew now that not even seeing Bobbi's change into something which was not human was enough to force him into that decision. So much of him still wanted to dig that ship out, dig it out and put it to use. So much, so very much. Before he could make a decision, he could see what was in Bobbi's shed. He had to see what was in Bobbi's shed. 5. Halfway back, he stopped in the cold, slippery moonlight, struck by a question. Why had they bothered to hide the car? Because the rental people would report it missing and more police would turn up in Haven. No, Hertz or Avis people might not even know it was missing for days, and it would be longer still before the cops traced Anne's family connection here. At least a week, maybe more like 2. And Gardner thought by then Haven would be done worrying about outside interference, one way or another, for good. So who had the car been hidden from? From you, guard. They hid it from you. They still don't want you to know what they're capable of when it comes to protecting themselves. They hid it, and Bobbi told you Anne went away. He went back with his dangerous secret turning in his mind like a jewel. I have hair on my bookmark. We're going to stop there, and I don't know if I'll be here tonight. I'll say if I'm not here by 7:15, 7:30, I won't be on. My husband's actually getting out of work at 6, so I probably spend time with him. Tomorrow I'm off, so there's no reading at all tomorrow. And if I'm not here tonight, I will be back Tuesday morning. All right? So y'all have a Merry Christmas. I love y'all. Don't forget to follow if you want. And that'll help you keep up with my ratings. And I will talk to y'all soon. Bye. By the way, the hatch is the next section.